Hello again, and thank you for joining us for the final part of this fancy comma presentation series on science news literacy and misinformation. For the third and last part of this presentation, we will talk about how to use science literacy when reading about science in the news, or for shorthand, science news literacy, to protect yourself and others against the spread of misinformation. Let's start by examining why fake news or misinformation is so insidious. Fake news is very insidious. It influences views and interpretations of people, events, and important issues. It sows distrust in fundamental social institutions and accepted truths and accepted methods of validating information and interpretations. The most insidious aspect of fake news is that much of this destructiveness is accomplished under the radar. For those who are consuming and spreading fake news, these stories and the misinformation they convey are taken as truths. These falsities, masked as truths, sow distrust in verified truths. Fake news is nothing new. The use of outright false or misleading information through propaganda, conspiracy theories, hoaxes, and other forms of fake news has been a tool to affect political behaviors and public opinions of leaders, groups of people, and social institutions since ancient times. Since these times, fake news has not only been a common tool, but it has also been a powerful tool, and therefore a dangerous tool. Fake news has been around for millennia. However, in the internet age, fake news takes on a different level of insidiousness. While the internet age brings an increased capacity to verify information, it also brings information overload and a proliferation of misleading information or outright falsities presented as truths. The internet has also allowed fake news to spread more widely and more rapidly. The structure of the internet, particularly social media, one of the main venues for the spread of fake news, allows individuals to surround themselves only with like-minded people and to shut out counter-narratives and critical challenges to their perspectives and held beliefs. Citizen journalists, influencers, and other non-credentialed celebrities have become major figures, having a strong influencing opinion and behavior. In many cases, an influence stronger than family, friends, or leaders or experts. Further, computer technology allows anyone to manipulate technology skillfully with relative ease. These manipulations can be used to mask inconsistencies or sources to make them appear legitimate. The inundation of information, that is, information overload, is a key component in the ability of fake news to reach audiences and spread. Particularly in the case of social media, where individuals scroll through and quickly read over information without diving deeply into it. Readers are often distracted by the content or topic of the story and fail to verify the source or recognize red flags indicating fake news. Clickbait is a particularly potent form of fake news in this context. Further, readers may be overconfident about the apparent validity of the story because the story has been shared, liked, or positively commented on by so many people. This overconfidence, or uncritical assumption of validity based on popularity, is even more likely where the reader sees that trusted friends, coworkers, or family members also liked and shared the story. Next, we will discuss methods you can use to detect misinformation within news stories and to figure out if a news story is fake news. Applying the principles and practice of science news literacy when reading science news, or general news, online protects not only yourself from consuming falsities, but it protects you from spreading fake news and thus protects the public from consuming fake news. If you carefully examine the appearance and content of a story, there are numerous red flags that indicate fake news. These red flags become readily visible if you know what to look for. Some of the main ways to immediately detect fake news is to look at the background. What kind of images do you see? What kinds of advertisements? Does it look well put together? You should also look at who wrote the article. What are their credentials? What is their work history? Who do they work for? Are they independent? Do they work for a major mainstream news source? Are they working with a funding agency? And who are they funded by? Also, you should look at where the data comes from. Who collected it? What methods did they use to collect it? How many people were included in the sample? What information or data is not included? Some other relatively easy ways to detect fake news without having to do deep background research to verify the methods and data are to research the reporter. How do they present themselves? Do they express strong political leanings or affiliations that might bias them? Do they receive funding or other benefits from organizations or other sponsors that could influence their perspective or representation? Also, research who the reporter works for. Look at the mission statement. Ask the same types of questions about the reporter's employer and their mission as you do about the reporter. Finally, you can research related stories. Look to other sources for coverage of the same topic or related topics. What information are they presenting? How are they presenting it? What conclusions have they come to? Other ways to identify fake news include researching the values of the news source. Again, what does their mission statement say? Do they have a statement or code of ethics for their reporters? Do they follow a standard of practice or ethics that mimics or at least aligns with mainstream scientific standards? Also look at the URL for the source. Verify that it is from a legitimate source and not simply mimicking a legitimate source. For example, is it CNN.com, which is actually CNN, or is it something like CNN.co.com, which would be a fake site mimicking CNN? It is also crucial to examine the content. Critically analyze the content. Does the information sound legitimate? Who or what resources does the story point to for support of its argument or perspectives? And examine the limitations. Has the author mentioned limitations? How have they justified or explained these limitations? Do they express any potential bias? Do they express affiliations or backgrounds that might bias their perspective? Hiding flaws, biases, or limitations is a common and effective way to play into the reader's biases, reinforcing confirmation bias and covering the illegitimacy of the information or conclusions. Finally, examining the content also means analyzing word choice. Does it stir or express strong emotions? Does it editorialize? Does it demonize groups of people, organizations, or political leaders or institutions? In other words, ask yourself, is it trying to sow disdain? The use of strong, inflammatory language to stir emotions and affect opinions is a form of propaganda. It is a common method of drawing in audiences, swaying opinions, and sowing distrust and disdain or allegiance. In the same vein as stories that do not discuss limitations or potential biases, a source or story that doesn't mention and ideally address alternative viewpoints or contradictory information or perspectives plays into confirmation bias and reinforces uncritical consumption of information. The most trustworthy, legitimate sources, specifically coverage of a topic that comes from academic or professional experts and follows standards of practice and ethics for their field, will not only make alternative perspectives and counterarguments apparent, but they will address why their perspective is legitimate in light of these. They will also make their limitations apparent. They will provide explanations for why these limitations do not delegitimate their research. They also take a hard, honest look at the gaps that still remain even after the information or interpretations that they have made. It is also crucial to examine the funding sources. Funding sources also have biases. In fact, often the biases of the funding agencies are the ones that really count, because these are the biases that are most likely to be reflected in news stories. Legitimate news sources and organizations and experts should make their funding sources apparent on their webpage in the sections on About the Company, Background, or Mission Statements. Ultimately, the question to ask is what type of information or representations might serve the interests of these funders? Do they have a stake in a particular political perspective or particular interpretations of events? For example, if you are reading an article about the effects of global warming, and the reporting agency is funded by the coal industry, you have to consider that the funder would benefit from downplaying the effects of global warming and the role of non-renewable energy sources. So, determining the sources of potential biases is not just about the obvious biases of the person reporting the information. It is also about more than just the biases of the reporting agency or organization. It includes the potential biases of any affiliations that any of these parties may have. One of the most important questions to ask is who the funding sources are. More generally, are they independently funded? Are their funders organizations? Are they profit or nonprofit? Are they funded by governmental organizations? Or are they funded by private individuals? Ultimately, it comes down to a question of who is benefiting from the perspective expressed in the story. Further, it is a question of how they are benefited. Are they benefiting economically? Are there business or personal interests or funding sources that could be affected? Are they benefiting politically? Are there political affiliations or positions that could be affected? Are they benefiting occupationally? What career benefits could come from the publicity gained from this story for either the organization or the individual reporting? Thank you for joining us for the third part of this presentation on science news literacy as a tool to prevent the spread of misinformation. We hope you enjoyed this discussion and you will check out the other interesting and informative YouTube presentations from Fancy Comma.